Some of the most unsettling stories on the internet come from people sharing their experience anonymously. Tonight we're looking at three disturbing stories posted on Reddit, encounters involving extremely wealthy and secretive groups that the people involved still can't fully explain. If you enjoy creepy Reddit stories like these, consider subscribing for more. Now, let's start with the first one. Story 1. I worked at a luxury retreat in Maine. I've gone back and forth about posting this for a while. Part of me feels like I'm probably overthinking things and that there's a perfectly normal explanation for what I saw. But another part of me keeps remembering certain details that don't really make sense, and I can't seem to shake the feeling that something about that place wasn't right. For context, this happened about 4 years ago. At the time, I was working seasonal hospitality jobs, mostly in resorts and private lodges. Through a staffing agency, I got offered a position as a butler at what they described as an exclusive private retreat in northern Maine. The pay was extremely good for a seasonal job, which was the main reason I accepted it. When I first arrived, the place honestly looked like something out of a movie. The property sat deep in the woods, at the end of a long private road that cut through miles of forest. The building itself was huge, a stone manor surrounded by smaller guest houses and a massive lawn that eventually just faded into trees. It felt less like a hotel and more like some kind of private country club for people with serious money. Most of the time, the property was quiet. A small staff lived on site and maintained the place, but guests only arrived a few weeks each season. And when they did arrive, it was obvious these people were extremely wealthy. Some came in black SUVs with tinted windows. Others arrived by helicopter. The helicopters would land in a clearing behind the manor, and within a few minutes the guests would be inside, like they had done this hundreds of times before. At first, nothing about the job seemed particularly strange. It was normal hospitality work, serving dinner, preparing drinks, keeping things clean. But there was one rule the staff were told during orientation that I remember thinking was odd. After midnight, staff were not allowed outside of the building under any circumstances. We needed to move between buildings on the property. We had to do it before midnight. The explanation we were given was simple enough. They said the guests valued privacy and didn't want staff wandering the grounds at night. At the time, that seemed reasonable, but after working there for a couple of weeks, I started noticing things that made that rule feel different. The first thing was the lights. Late at night, long after the guests had finished dinner and drinks, I sometimes noticed lights moving through the forest trees beyond the lawn. At first I assumed they were security patrols, but they didn't move like security, they moved slowly, almost like people walking through the forest. Then there were sounds. One night I was cleaning glasses in the hallway near one of the side entrances of the manor when I heard something coming from the woods. It sounded like someone running. Fast. Leaves crunching, branches snapping. For a moment I thought maybe it was an animal, but the rhythm didn't sound right. Then I heard something else. Voices. Several voices. Too far away to understand what they were saying, but definitely human. The whole thing lasted maybe 10 seconds before everything went quiet again. The next morning I noticed something that made me uneasy. Several of the guests came down to breakfast wearing boots that were still covered in mud. One man had a long scratch along the side of his arm. They all seemed to be in unusual good spirits, laughing, telling stories. At one point I was refilling coffee when I overheard one of them saying something that stuck with me. He said, laughing, "Honestly, I thought that one might actually make it to the river." The others laughed like it was some kind of joke. At the time I assumed they were talking about a hunting trip. The forest around the region are full of deer, and wealthy people sometimes organize elaborate hunts. But the strange thing was that I never saw any hunting equipment. No rifles, no bows, nothing like that. Just groups of guests disappearing into the woods, sometimes after midnight, and returning a few hours later looking exhausted and covered in dirt. Over time, I started noticing something else. Whenever those weekends happened at the retreat, there were sometimes reports in the nearby towns about people going missing. Not immediately, usually a few days later. Someone who hadn't come home, someone last seen walking near the forest. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe I was connecting things that had nothing to do with each other. But the moment that really made me start questioning things happened near the end of the season. The weekend retreat had more guests than usual. The atmosphere inside the manor felt almost excited, like everyone was waiting for something. Around midnight, I was clearing empty glasses from the lounge when two of the guests walked past me towards the back entrance. They were speaking quietly, but I caught part of their conversation. One of them asked, "Do you think this one will run?" The other replied, "They always run." They stepped outside a moment later. About 15 minutes later, I heard it again. The running. This time it was closer, much closer. Branches snapping, somewhere just behind the lawn. Heavy breathing, fast, desperate. Then the shouting started, multiple voices coming from deeper in the woods. I stood there several seconds, trying to convince myself it was just some kind of hunting game. But the more I listened, the more one thought kept creeping into my mind. Whatever was running out there, it didn't sound like an animal. It sounded like a person. I finished my shift that night, but I barely slept. The next morning I packed my things and told the manager I had received another job offer and needed to leave early. They didn't ask any questions, and maybe there's completely normal explanation for everything I heard out there. But sometimes when I think back to that place and the way those guests talked about the hunt, I can't help wondering what was really happening in those woods after midnight. Story 2. I was a hotel valet and found a strange ring in an abandoned car. I've debated posting this for a while because I'm honestly not sure if what I uncovered was something real or if I just got caught up in a lot of coincidences that started to look suspicious. But every time I think about it, that weekend certainly still bothers me. A few years ago, I worked as a valet at a fairly large hotel in a small mountain town. The place mostly catered to tourists during ski season, but during the rest of the year it was pretty quiet. Most night jobs were simple. Guests arrived, you take their car keys, park the car in the underground garage and bring it back when they leave. But every year there was one weekend that was different. A group of extremely wealthy guests would arrive all at once. Expensive cars, private drivers, sometimes even small helicopters landing outside town. No one at the hotel ever explained exactly what event they were attending, but the staff all knew about it. People just referred to it as the gathering weekend. Most of the guests stayed only 1 or 2 nights, then they disappeared just as quickly as they arrived. The strange part was what happened in town during the weekend. Restaurants closed early, bars were quieter than usual, locals tend to stay home after dark. No official rule or anything like that. Just something people seem to do. I didn't really think much about it during my first year working there, but during my second year something happened that made that weekend feel a lot more unsettling. One of the guests arrived late on the first night, driving a very expensive black sedan. I parked the car in the underground garage like normal, but the guest never came back for it. The next morning, The car was still there. Then, the next night, by the third day, the hotel management started asking questions. The guest who checked in under the name had already checked out, but the car was still in the garage. Eventually, they decided to have it towed. Before the tow truck arrived, I went down to the garage to move the car to a more accessible spot. That's when I noticed something laying on the ground near the front tire. At first I thought it was just a coin, but when I picked it up I realized it was a ring. Heavy gold. Definitely expensive. What caught my attention was the design. Instead of a gemstone, the top of the ring had a strange symbol engraved into it. It almost looked like some kind of crest or emblem. Very detailed, like something you'd see on an old signet ring. I figured it must have belonged to one of the guests who had driven the car, so I brought it upstairs to the front desk to log it as lost property. Later that night I showed that ring to one of the older valets who had worked the hotel for years. The moment he saw it, his reaction completely changed. He didn't say anything for a few seconds, just stared at the ring. Then he quietly asked where I had found it. When I explained about the car in the garage, he just shook his head slightly. Then he said something that honestly made me uncomfortable. He told me that during the gathering weekend, it was best not to get curious about the guest. I asked him what he meant by that. He didn't really answer directly. Instead, he told me something about the town. Apparently, the gathering had been going on for decades, every year around the same time, and according to him, locals had learned over the years that it was better to stay inside after the dark. Again, not an official rule, just something people did because occasionally someone would go missing. Not every year, but often enough that people noticed the pattern. I remember laughing a little when he said that. It sounded like the kind of exaggerated story people tell to make something seem mysterious. But he didn't laugh. He just told me to return the ring to the lost property and forget about it. For a while I tried to do exactly that. But a few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I started looking more closely at the ring. Eventually I realized something strange. The symbol engraved into looked familiar. After thinking about it for a while, I remember where I had seen it. There's an old stone monument just outside town near one of the hiking trails. Most people barely notice it. It's just a large weathered stone with a carved symbol on the side. Out of curiosity, I drove there that afternoon to check, and when I saw the carving up close, my stomach dropped. It was the same symbol as the one the ring had. Not identical, but close enough that it was clearly related. That monument had been there longer than anyone in town could remember. And the strange gathering of wealthy visitors had also been happening for decades. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe the ring belonged to someone involved in some kind of private club or old society. But sometimes I still think about that abandoned car and the way my coworker reacted when he saw the ring, because the one thing he said before walking away still sticks in my head. He told me, "Some people come to this town once a year. They expect everyone else to pretend they were never there." When I asked him what that meant about staying inside during the weekend, he hesitated for a moment. Then he lowered his voice a little and said something that I remember word for word. He said there had always been rumors in town about the group that visited every year. No one knew exactly who they were, but some people believed they were part of some kind of secret society or even a cult. Not the kind you see on TV. Something quieter, something older. According to him, locals had learned a long time ago that it was better not to ask questions about those weekends. Not because anyone told them to, just because over the years strange things had happened during those visits. He said that every so often some people would disappear, not right away, sometimes a few days later, sometimes someone who had last been seen walking home late night. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe it wasn't. I remember laughing a little when he said that. It sounded like some kind of local legend every small town has, but he didn't laugh with me again. So when I returned the ring, I checked the name in the register to cross check and see who this person was. The name used during check in didn't seem to exist anywhere else. Eventually, the car was removed from the garage and taken away by the towing company. The ring stayed in the hotel's lost property drawer for months. No one ever came to claim it. No one ever called asking about it. And the next year, when the same weekend came around, I noticed something strange. A group of expensive black cars pulled in the hotel driveway. Some of the guest steps out wearing rings, heavy gold rings, with symbols engraved on top. Symbols that looked very similar to the one I had found. That was the moment I started wondering if the rumors about the gathering weren't just rumors after all. Story 3. A group of people has been buying houses all over my town and something about it feels wrong. I'm not sure if I'm just reading too much into things, but something has been happening in my town over the last year that a lot of people have started quietly talking about. And the more I pay attention to it, the stranger it feels. I live in a fairly small town, not rural exactly, but the kind of place where most people recognize each other at the grocery store and news travel pretty quickly. For as long as I can remember, the town has been stable, families living here for decades, the occasional house going up for sale, but nothing unusual. Then about a year ago, things started changing. The first house that sold unusually fast was one near the edge of town. Apparently the owners received an offer well above asking price. They accepted it almost immediately. At first everyone just assumed it was someone from the big city buying a vacation home. But then it started happening again. Another house sold, then another. And each time the same pattern appeared. The houses were purchased quickly, often above market price. And the buyers moved in very quietly, almost always late at night. Neighbors rarely saw moving trucks. Sometimes people would notice lights turning on in those houses after midnight. But the new residents themselves were rarely seen. They didn't socialize. They didn't attend town events. They didn't seem to have regular jobs. They were just there, watching. That's the part a lot of people eventually started noticing. You'd walk down the street at night and sometimes see someone standing near one of those houses, not doing anything, just looking down the road. At first people joked about it, speculations about wealthy investors or some kind of private community forming. But the more houses they bought, the harder it became to ignore, because the buyers always seemed connected. Same types of cars, same moving company, and sometimes they seemed to know each other. You'd see small groups of them standing together quietly near the end of the street, late at night, talking in low voices. Another strange thing was how aggressively they made offers on certain homes. One family I know was offered nearly double the value of their house. They refused. They had lived there for all their life and had no reason to leave. A few weeks later, the house suddenly went up for sale, which surprised everyone because they had been so clear about staying. Within days, the property was sold to the same group buying the other homes. No one ever saw them move out. No moving trucks. No farewell. Just a for sale sign one day. And new residents shortly after. That's when people in town really started talking. Quietly. Because by that point, something else had become obvious. The new residents weren't just buying houses on one street. They were buying properties across the entire town. Different neighborhoods, different areas, but all connected somehow. Once they moved in, the houses always followed the same pattern. Curtains closed, minimal activity during the day, lights on late at night, sometimes silhouettes moving behind the windows. Lately, the situation has started feeling even more uncomfortable, because almost every week another house seems to sell. More offers, more people quietly leaving, more of those same buyers moving in. Now, when I walk through certain parts of town at night, it feels like the place has changed. Lights glowing behind curtains, people standing in the driveways watching the streets, watching the houses that haven't sold yet. Maybe it's just a wealthy investor slowly buying property. Maybe there's a perfectly normal explanation. But the longer it goes on, the more it feels like something else. Like the town is slowly turning into something, and the rest of us just haven't been told what yet. Those were 3 unsettling stories shared online by people who claim they stumbled across something they were never meant to see. Whether they were coincidences, rumors, or something much stranger, it's hard to say. If you enjoy creepy Reddit stories like these, consider subscribing for more unsettling encounters. And if you've ever experienced something strange that still doesn't make sense to you, feel free to share it in comments. Until next time, stay safe out there.